Good evening and welcome to the May 29th, 2025 Oregon Public Defense Commission Workgroup meeting. We are here with one action item, and then we'll just have a broader discussion about other things. But the action item is related to Exhibit F of the an addendum to the 23-25 contracts, and then will be included in the 25-27 contracts. At the last commission meeting, we heard some concerns and gave the agency some direction about two sections in Exhibit F. One of them was about the indemnification section, and the language in the indemnification section wanting to ensure that it's clear that contractors are not indemnifying the state or OPDC against any actions. And then the second section was related to payment guarantee, that contractors were not guaranteeing that payment would be made to people that work on their cases that are actually paid by OPDC. So we had a meeting on Tuesday with the Department of Justice and OPDC staff and the director, and were able to get the language adjusted pretty easily in both of those sections. The DOJ was really apologetic about the language in the indemnification, said that it wasn't intended at all to broaden the indemnification clause, that it was really designed to just make it clear that the state has the authority, that the DOJ represents them, and that the language in the addendum was, they understood how it could be read the way it was read, but that wasn't the intent. So they were happy to modify it. And we had to do a little bit of explaining, but not very much, about the payment piece. The DOJ, one of the DOJ lawyers who's been working on this, watched the commission meeting before our meeting on Tuesday so that she understood what the issues were. So that was very helpful. And the language was changed, and you all saw those changes that were sent out to you earlier. So I can have Ken pull them up on the screen if you would like to review them before we kind of give our little nod to them, if you think that would be helpful, or though, let's do that just for other people who are watching.
And Chair, I'm going to go ahead and display the actual Amendment F piece, not that cover page, if that would work best. And let me know. I've zoomed in. Hopefully it's a good size, but let me know if it needs to be larger. Is that up on screen now?
Yes.
Great. Is that a good size for folks?
Yes.
Excellent.
Great. So as you can see, this is redlined. The Exhibit F dated May 27th, 2025, that was put in there because some contractors have already signed an Exhibit F. And so we wanted to make sure that it's clear that this is the new and updated. And the plan is just so that people are aware and the commission's aware that there's going to be one document that's sent out to contractors, and it's going to be a contract extension that includes this Exhibit F. And so even if you've already signed the old Exhibit F, you're going to get a contract extension with the new Exhibit F. It'll be one document. Everyone will sign the same document. It'll go out to everybody so that we won't have two sets of documents and having to replace various documents. It'll be one document that's all encompassing. So that's why this Exhibit F says dated May 27th. And then do you want to just scroll down a bit, Ken? All right, so the first part is the Section 4. The language was added that says the Section 4 does not apply to services to support the legal representation of clients assigned to contractor that are approved and paid directly by OPDC, either through the OPDC routine expenses or pre-authorized expense policies. So that just makes it very clear that if you're hiring an investigator, interpreter, or whatever, that DOJ or that the agency's paying, that you're not responsible for paying. All right, Ken, do you want to scroll down to the indemnification? Okay, so here you could see the old indemnification clause, and that last sentence that was the problematic sentence has been stricken. And the language that's already in the contract, I suggested they just put it back in the addendum 2 to make it very clear. So this already appears in the contracts, but it's here again, notwithstanding the above. Contractor has no duty to indemnify, defend, or hold harmless OPDC and the state of Oregon for its actions, decisions, work activities, or failures to act related to this contract. So that makes it very clear that contractors are not indemnifying DOJ, not indemnifying OPDC, and that the indemnification clause, and as I said, this already is in the contracts, but I had them just restate it in the addendum to make it really clear, and they took out that last sentence. Any concerns about that or questions? I think that addresses our concerns and makes it really clear, and I should be very clear, this was contractors' concerns that we discussed. And I think that addresses those concerns pretty clearly and resolves them. Does anyone have any concerns about how this may not resolve it?
No, I did want to say that I think this is fine for us to approve. But if any contractor still has concerns, they should consult independent legal advice and not act on our particular opinions of what this says, just to make that clear.
That's fair. That's very helpful. Thank you. All right. And with that, I will, we notice this is an action item, so I'll take a motion to adopt Exhibit F and send it out with the contract extensions that we've already approved.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Okay. And Mara, do you want to take a quick roll call vote?
Sure thing. Commissioner Nash,
Yes.
Commissioner Mandelberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Lipscomb,
Yes.
Commissioner Harris,
Yes.
and Commissioner Buckley.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, with unanimous quorum, quorum and unanimous vote, that passes. Thank you. And Commissioner Buckley, I know you have a very limited period of time and we're happy to have you stick around, or if you need to leave, you can leave whenever you need to leave.
I can stay for 7 more minutes. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. So we have a quorum, but we don't need a quorum to continue an informational style meeting, and that's what I thought we could do next. During our weekly meeting that the vice chair and I have with the executive director this week, we talked about the June conference that's coming up. And I expressed that I thought that our kind of more open dialogue that we had in April in Medford was a pretty helpful and really I thought helpful to contractors. And I wondered if we couldn't do something like that in the June meeting on a broader scale. And that conversation kind of evolved into maybe what we should do is similar to a legislative informational meeting where we solicit input from contractors about issues or concerns or things that they would like to see occur, or suggestions they have for us of things that they think would be helpful for the commission. And I want to discuss that and tonight, and think about what we want to do that? What might we want to do? What information we might want to solicit? And specifically, I mean, the way I was thinking about it really was, and conceptually was, what would our goal be? What kind of information do we want to elicit? And Ken suggested that maybe we have a group of questions that we ask people to answer and give input on that, either in writing, or they can show up, or on video and talk to us about that. But is there information that we would like from contractors that maybe we could get some input on? And some of the ideas that we talked about were what kind of, maybe things like, what kind of barriers to representation of their clients do they have? One of the ones that I thought about is, maybe elicit information about what they know about the reasons. Well, I guess it's sort of related, but why they might leave public defense, or why they've heard other people leaving public defense. which is also similar to the barriers to representation. You see, what makes your life really difficult as a public defender, kind of the intangible things, because I think we don't really talk about that a whole lot. And not just what makes your life difficult, but what we might be able to do short of write me a bigger check and reduce my caseloads. You know, what other kinds of things have we not really talked about? And then Susan's, I thought was, idea was, to kind of make and Ken gave up with great language, make a value statement about, when you're in did you write that down, Ken? The sentence that I'm going to put you on the spot.
I didn't write it down exactly, but it was something along the lines of it was to focus on the fact that oftentimes the agency has higher aspirations than we are provided budget or resources to meet. And so given that we have these resource constraints, how would contractors like for us to balance the need to provide public defense services given the resources we have? I don't think I said it as nicely as I did in our individual meeting, but that was kind of the gist.
Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I think that what I was, and I'm sorry, Ken, that you didn't write down your language because it was really good.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about how to balance the political and resource constraints we have that keep us from achieving, at least in the short term, everything in our 6-year plan. But we haven't heard much from our contractors about if they have ideas about how we could maybe do a better job living within the constraints that we have. And I'm not sure that all of them necessarily are aware of all of the constraints that we're operating within. And so I thought that it would be useful to hear their ideas about how to achieve the maximum of our goals while living within the constraints that we cannot change. I've heard all of our ideas. I'd like to hear whether they have some ideas that maybe we haven't thought of yet. That was my goal for that.
So I was thinking,
I was just saying, do other people think this is a good idea or something that's worth pursuing?
I'm always open to hearing people's ideas, and specifically from the crisis counties. What can the crisis counties do that they're not doing that could make a difference? And again, I keep getting stuck on mandatory settlement conferences. Would that be a help? And in the discussion about access to clients that we had in Jackson County, that was new information to me, and I thought there were some specific suggestions there on how that might be improved.
I think these are all good ideas. I do think when you ask people questions like, why would you consider leaving public defense? They'll give the answers that we all know.
Yeah.
But I think that, and similar to, I think what Susan and Ken are saying, and you probably, Jennifer, as well, how to frame this question, but in the limited resource question, I don't know whether you'd ask people directly, but I think it would be okay if you ask them, if given the realities of what's the available resources and the people that are available to do this work, bringing new people in, if given the choice, would you choose 5% fewer cases or 10% more salary? That'll really get out to the people who are, okay, well, I'll take more cases. Would you rather have, a flat salary and fewer cases, or 5% more cases and 10% more money? And that would really make people think, well, I'll do that. I can work a little harder. And I will make more money. And the reason I say 5 and 10% is because your overhead is about 50% more or less. So 50% goes to the salary that would go to the bottom line of the lawyer. So you would really get to their values of what is really keeping them doing this work. Is it truly work conditions and lower wages or lower caseloads, and they're okay with the wages? Or is it something else? That way and I'm just trying to stimulate a discussion here about caseloads and salaries. Now, it's no secret that I argued 10 years ago, 8 years ago, when we had many discussions at the management meetings about high caseloads and low salaries, that I argued the first thing we do is raise salaries. On the same theory that if you're in an airplane and it decompresses, you got to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you can save anybody else. Also, that if we did want to decrease caseloads, we needed to have higher salaries to attract more people. You can't get more lawyers unless you make it a salary that's fair. But instead, I think the position was taken that we needed to do both at the same time. And so here we are. At least that's one of the reasons, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but I think that if we at least in the crisis counties where we have a shortage of lawyers, let's have this discussion. And like you said, instead of us saying what it should be, we're going to do 15% or we're going to do this. Let's have the discussion and let's see what people say about this. We are on a trajectory for less cases. That's good. We're at a trajectory for more money. That's good. But again, we've hit a not a wall, but there's political realities. And I think we know that. And maybe by starting a discussion, the providers can also start thinking about some of these hard choices that we've been faced with.
Are we though on a trajectory for fewer cases and more money? I'm not
Well,
sure that's true. And I'm not, and I guess I don't want to be a naysayer. I mean, I always think of these things. I said this the other day. I always think of these things like in reverse. Like what information are you trying to gather? And then you have to frame the question very carefully.
yeah.
So
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe I should say I hoped we were on a trajectory for fewer cases and higher salaries.
yeah.
But I think a year or two ago we probably were, and the legislature has provided a lot of money, a lot of extra money too.
Yeah.
So we can't say that hasn't happened. That's what they expected to have happen, by the way. So
I I worry about giving specific numbers, and also it's not really an either. So there's that. Also, it's not really an either or, because the answers are probably both, right? And then the other thing is, I don't think you necessarily have a representative sample of it. I mean, you don't have enough people answering that question to be able to have, yeah, this is what people want. I just worry because sometimes, like in case files, like one little bit of information gets elicited and then it just takes on a life of its own and becomes this whole big narrative for a case. And I worry about that if you ask that kind of a question, that depending on the answer, it becomes this narrative. Well, people, all they want is to be paid more money and they'll just take as many cases as possible, which is the old model, right? So the old model was you could make a fair amount of money if you just took lots and lots of cases, but we stopped doing that for good reasons. Susan?
well, yeah, I don't disagree with a lot of that. Like I say, I'm spitballing here, and I don't know if I would give exact numbers either, but those are some of the choices. I mean, if limited budget and we have an unrepresented crisis, we can get more people in, and that would hopefully reduce or keep the caseload the same, I guess, maybe as an option, particularly with all the new filings going on at the county level. But also, if you have an extra, whatever, $20 million, and well, do we give a 5% bump over COLA or do we add more lawyers? Those are choices we make. And our workforce might say, well, give us a 5% plus COLA bump. And others might say, no, we need more lawyers. those are the choices that I think are facing us with limited, not limited, but I mean, we have a lot of money in our, the legislature is very generous. But like I say, there's political realities. I don't,
Well,
you're right. I'm just trying to get this discussion going and get the providers getting I just think this could provide feedback to us from providers.
Susan?
I'm wondering whether we're talking about apples and oranges. I think that you get some kinds of input if you give people specific numbers and statistics and ask them to respond to a specific set of limited choices. And you get a different kind of input if you talk about the systemic problem generally and say, look, we're dealing with a lot of a increasing evidently number of case filings. We're dealing with different counties that have different cultures and different histories of practices. We're dealing with a legislature that has a limited amount of money to parcel out among a lot of good causes. And we're dealing with executive branch that has its own legal requirements, its own procedures, its own traditions that we have to adjust to because we're the newbies. How can an agency like ours operate in that kind of context, in that kind of a systemic situation? I think both kinds of input are useful, but I think they're different. The kinds of thing that I'm talking about is the second one, and the kind of thing that Rob is talking about is the first one. And I'm not saying that one is any better than the other. I think they're both would lead to valuable input, but I don't think they're the same thing. And so I would like to keep those things separate if we're going to be asking specific questions or deciding which kinds of questions to ask.
There, Paul?
Yeah, there is some low-hanging fruit that I don't think has been touched yet, and I always think that's the place to begin. It seems to me that there are misdemeanor cases that if the defendant shows up for arraignment, they could be reduced to violations and they wouldn't have to have an attorney appointed. I get that they want them to be misdemeanors up until the time that the defendant actually shows his or her face in court. But once that happens, and we obviously have a defendant who's paying attention and taking this seriously, misdemeanors often can be satisfactorily reduced to misdemeanors. Not always, but often. Same thing with felonies being reduced to misdemeanors. And I think there are a lot of felonies that go low-level felonies that go ahead and get a felony sentence, and that's really not beneficial to the defendant. It's not beneficial to society. It's not beneficial to anybody. If you end up with a felony jacket, it's really hard to get employed and stay employed. And if it's a low-level felony, I think they can be, if the defendant appears at arraignment, they could be at arraignment reduced to misdemeanors, and we could save a whole lot of money. And the same thing with misdemeanors that could be reduced to violations. And then we could also save a lot of money. I think the low-hanging fruit is at the low-level felonies and at the low-level misdemeanors. And I think that's really where we need to have a conversation with the DAs and get them focused on big cases and not on every case.
Yeah, I think that's, so the misdemeanors reduced to felonies, the DA would have to agree. And I think there is talk in individual counties that's starting to happen about that. I hear that there's some movement, I know, in Jackson County and maybe Multnomah County where and maybe other counties that we don't know about, where that's starting to happen. I don't know about the felonies being reduced to misdemeanors, but it's in the same category. And I mean, I think that is part of what's in the plan that that Ken is going to send to the governor, but it's kind of under a broader umbrella, which is to have discussions with public safety partners about alternative resolution to cases, which is that, and also the alternative resolution dockets, which that can be done on those too, which those would involve public defense, but the others, I mean, just because I think that I I think that even though the idea is not to impact public defense by getting those cases out of needing a public defender, it's still a good place for public defenders in that county, the leaders, to step in and create those systems that can occur for screenings so that those cases can get diverted out of the system, out of the public defense system.
I would agree with you if we had an infinite source of money, but we don't. We're looking at taxpayer money. And honestly, my experience is that there are a lot of cases that could be reduced down and save money. And we wouldn't be burdening the lawyers. We wouldn't be unnecessarily burdening the families of misdemeanor defendants and low felony defendants. I'm not talking about A and B felonies. I'm talking about C felonies being reduced to misdemeanors if the defendant shows up in court for the original arraignment and if the defendant is willing to plead at that stage. You know, even 10 minutes with a lawyer would be enough. We waste a lot of money on the low end cases. We cannot save money on the high end cases.
No, I think you and I are saying exactly the same thing. I think that's exactly right, and that's a very good point. Susan.
So I'm a little bit confused. I thought we were talking about what kinds of questions we should ask providers to weigh in on, and not what we thought we should do differently. But I think that Judge Lipscomb's comments are relevant to both Rob's suggestion and my suggestion. So I'm glad that he's made that specific example. They're relevant to Rob's suggestion because we could, of course, ask providers to comment on how their work would be different if Judge Lipscomb's suggestions were adopted. And they're relevant to my suggestion because adopting Judge Lipscomb's suggestions requires the cooperation of other actors in the system, specifically prosecutors, and possibly also the legislature if it ever got to the point of being a suggestion for new legislation. So again, if we're going to be asking questions along the lines that Rob suggested or along the lines that I suggested, Judge Lipscomb's example would possibly or probably be a good one to include as examples of the kinds of things we want people to weigh in on.
And what would that question look like?
What would that question look like? Well, I don't know. I mean, there's various ways that it could be phrased. For example, if it were phrased, and maybe Rob would be a better one to suggest on this, but you could phrase it as, would your lives, would your workload be easier? Would you be able to service more clients or handle more cases if the suggestions that Judge Lipscomb was making were instituted? Or if you wanted to put it in the framework of the kind of thing that I was suggesting, It might be, do you have suggestions for what other parts of the system might be required to do something like this? And do you have suggestions for how we could gain the cooperation of those other players in order to move this kind of project forward? So, there are different ways of framing the question. It could be done both ways or one or the other. But I think that the suggestion, which is an excellent one, of course, we all, I'm sure, agree with it, is one that could be used in the kinds of discussion that we're trying to elicit or that we're talking about eliciting.
Making notes. I like that idea. Suggestions of how to accomplish that in your county or others. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to mention too. Like the form of the question as a prompt to our providers, specifically in the crisis counties, would be, this is an idea, this is a proposal. It's been on the table for a while. What do you think the barriers in your county would be? What do you think the solutions to those objections would be? How many, do you have an idea of how many cases you think could be appropriate for this? Because some people might say, well, very few of our misdemeanors get charged unless they're serious in our county or whatever. But let's have a discussion about that. And would you be, and then maybe would you be willing to work on, within your county to see if you could meet everyone's objections so we can get this thing back on track and get the unrepresented numbers down again. So I think that's a good prompt for a discussion of this sort to support, Paul's proposal here, and because it does reduce caseloads, and it will save some funding, I guess, if we have caseloads go down. So I think it's a good prompt. Yeah, I like that.
So we have, I mean, CJC really, not us, I guess, has data, and OJD would have data about how many cases would be eligible. So I don't think we need to ask the providers that, because they're not in the best position to know that information, but certainly, I like what are the barriers to implementation, and what are your suggested solutions to overcome those barriers?
Yeah, and I don't know. I still might ask him the question about the data. And we know it's anecdotal, and maybe it is. Maybe it is a waste of time, or a misuse of valuable time. And focus on the things we could maybe move down, down the table.
Okay. Other ideas? We don't want to ask. I think the idea was to ask maybe 3 or 4 broad questions that are really tailored to information that we really want. My thought about the leaving, I mean, yeah, we all know why, but I hear over and over again, like, how do you know that's really true?
Mm.
When I say, well, people leave public defense because of this, how do you know that's true? That is what I get back. So it would be nice to have people telling us, because then we could say, well, here's how we know that's true. But you're right. I think we know the answers to that. And that is, and also I think we can obtain that information from exit interviews from public defenders and from sorry, I had enough thoughts popped in my head. Public defenders and the trial division. I wonder if we can't put it in the contracts, but if we can ask, if that's a data point that down the line we can ask providers to collect, is when they have a person that leaves their contract or leaves their employment, to gather some specific data as to why they're leaving. Because that would be helpful information for us. Okay. Other questions, other thoughts? I've got 3 things, I think. The first one is the barriers to representation. The other one is 4 questions. The other one is broadly speaking, of course, wordsmith, how to achieve, as many goals as possible under the budget constraints, that language. And then the other one is what we can do to help in crisis counties. Because I mean, ultimately, it's what do you need us, what do you want us to do? What can we do to help? So what can we do to help reduce the unrepresented in crisis counties or overall? And then the last one about the barriers to implementation and solutions to implementation for reduction of, again, wordsmithing, but reductions of misdemeanors to violations or felonies to misdemeanors at arraignment to reduce the impact on public defense. It's probably enough, right? Because you ask very many more questions, people are gonna. And then we can, because of the public accommodation accessibility requirements, we're going to have to, if we're going to have people appear in front of us, we need to give the ability to appear by video as well, and also in person to answer these questions in orally, or they can submit them in writing. And our thought was not to have public comment, to have this, except we were going to solicit public comment specifically about performance standards that are going to be qualification standards that are going to be on the agenda this month, because remember we previewed those in April and said that in June they would be coming up, and to kind of give providers a heads up about that. So we thought it's appropriate to solicit written public comment, but we're not going to have oral public comment this meeting. Any other thoughts or anything that you want to talk about? I did see, just as a brief update, I looked yesterday and I see Lisa's on, she can tell us that 2614, the Senate version, went through its first round of voting yesterday, or today. I guess it was scheduled for the 29th, that's today. So I don't know if that actually happened or not. But it looks like that, no, it did, it was the dash B enrolled. So that was that, it looks like that's the version that's going to move forward. And you know, that's the version that Senator Prozanski wrote, and I appreciate all of his work on that, and helps us maintain our independence as much as was possible under these circumstances, this legislative circumstance. So I think that's helpful. Is there anything else we want to talk about or discuss while we have? Oh, there's Alton. While we're here. Hi, Alton. You're showing up just as I think we're getting ready to adjourn. I know. Thank you for making it though. We did, just a quick update, we did approve the changes to Exhibit F so the contract extensions can go out right away. Yep, those will start. Oh, those will go out starting tomorrow for people who are for providers who are tuning in. And we also just had a discussion about soliciting some provider, not just contractors, input about things that the commission can do to help the system overall, and specifically the unrepresented persons crisis, and to ask some specific questions, and people can give us the answers to those questions at the June meeting, either in person or on video or in writing. Okay, anything else for the good of the order? I realize this is a short meeting, but we're going to be meeting in a couple of weeks, less than a couple of weeks in Bend. We'll see. I know we're going to see Judge Lipscomb there. I know Alton said you're going, Susan's going. Are you going to go, Rob?
Yep.
Okay, well, great. Well, a lot of people in person there. I don't know who's going. Can't remember. I don't think Tom is, but I'm not sure. I can't remember. One other just brief update, and that is that we have submitted names to the governor's office for consideration for the commission for the voting members, and we'll hear when we hear. And we are soliciting, if you're a provider and you want to be on the commission, there are 2 provider positions that are non-voting positions that are specifically earmarked for providers that are one that is currently open, one that is going to be open, and that is for a rural public defense provider, and one is for an urban public defense provider. So if you're interested in that, we will be reviewing those very shortly and forwarding names to the governor's office. So put your applications in through Workday, and we will begin looking at those after June 1st, because our executive director is a little tied up right now with writing a memo to the governor, and that's the priority. But after the first week of June, we'll be starting to interview people. All right, any other questions, concerns, discussion? All right, well, with that, see everybody in a couple weeks. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate your time tonight. Have a good evening.